Welcome to the Casual Author Podcast. I'm Dan, sci-fi and fantasy author. Like you, I've got a lot on my plate. What with many children, a full-time job, a homestead, and loads of other responsibilities. I'm here to bring you inspiration, positivity, and community around having a busy life and still wanting to chase that author dream, even if you have to take a casual approach. For more information about the podcast, me, or my books, head to thecasualauthor.com. Let's get started. Hey, there's Dan Kenner from The Casual Author. This is episode number 137 of the podcast, and today is Monday, September 23rd, 2024, as I record this. Today we're talking to Zachary Forbes about capturing real characters to captivate your audience. So this is a really important conversation. We talk about how he makes sure to have his characters as real and authentic as possible, how to keep them true to themselves, to not make the reader fall out of the story. We talk a little bit about mechanisms he uses and how he uses other readers to get that. And he also co-authors with his brother, which is an extra check from a reality perspective. So you want to stick around for that conversation. I think you will really enjoy it. So, in terms of updates this week, from a homestead perspective, not a lot. Coincidentally, it has been, most of what we've done this last week is just maintenance, dealing with the same things that we normally do, lots of milk, lots of manure, composting, the meat chickens are still out. I'm moving them every day and feeding them. So, the meat chickens are only a couple weeks out from the end to keep it lighter. We'll be butchering them in a couple weeks. So what you do with the meat chickens is you can't give them free choice feed. I think I talked about this a little bit last week on the podcast, but if you give meat chickens free choice feed, it will cause them to overeat and then their bodies will grow too fast, and then you get to situations where their hearts can't keep them alive. Their hearts start failing because they're just growing too fast, or their legs break because their bodies get too fat and their legs can't support them. We've never had that problem before because we've always rationed their feed. So what you do is you start them free choice for the first couple weeks, and then you ration it a certain number of pounds per day for the flock, and then you increase that over time. So each week it goes up another pound until you hit the maximum. So I think 12 pounds is what we give to the whole flock of nearly, I think it's 27 birds right now. And that's what they'll be at next week, which will be the max before, so their bodies can grow. Anyway, it's just an interesting tidbit because you don't think about that. Meat chickens have to grow. They grow very fast, but they have to do it in a way that's safe for them. Otherwise, they die, which is very unfortunate, obviously, because it's a source of food. Um, but other than that, yeah, this last week I ventured towards teaching our calf, Mac, to be halter broke. So if you don't know anything about cows, like dogs, you can get a leash for dogs or cats and put a collar on them, and then the leash attaches to it. With cows, it's called a halter. And so you obviously can't put just a leash around their neck for various reasons. Their necks are just too big and it won't work to rein them in because the cow is much bigger than you. And so you have these halters, which is essentially just this rope tied in a specific formation. It wraps around their nose and goes around their head and under their chin and everything. And you can hook the chain under their chin. But you have to teach cow to get used to that, kind of like a dog, right? You can't just let them grow up without being on a collar and then throw it on them and expect them to behave. Same with the cows. So we bought a halter for the calf for Mac. And I tried putting it on him for the first time, and he's not thrilled. He hates it. But you do what you got to do. I got to train him so that when he's older and we need to lead him somewhere, he's used to having that halter on his head. He just fights it. I mean, I'm still stronger. I'm still bigger than him, stronger than him, so it works out. But he fights against it. He's such a snot when he's really unhappy with a halter. So I can drag him around a little bit and he'll come a little bit, but when he gets really fed up, he'll just flop over on his back. He'll just give up, flop over on his back. I'm just like, dude, why, why are you doing that? I have to wait for him to get back up again. And, we'll go through 3 or 4 flops before I'm like, all right, we'll try this again another day. Um, I think over time he'll get used to it. He's already starting to get a little bit used to it, but still, it's one of those things that you just got to do consistently. Otherwise, um, he won't learn. But let's see, it's now fall, so the weather has changed significantly. Leaves are going to start falling here. Unfortunately, the method for which we pick up our leaves, we have tons of trees, which I'm very grateful for. We have a lawnmower that we have a bagger on. And so I don't love raking leaves. I can, but it's one of those activities that just feels never ending because we have trees that just keep dumping and dumping, and the wind brings in our neighbors' leaves. So we bought a bagger for our riding lawnmower that will just pick them all up, sucks them up, puts them in bags, and we save them. So the leaves from the ground are very helpful for many reasons, right? You can compost them, put them in compost piles. You can use them as mulch on gardens. We use our grass clippings for that. But we do like to use it for bedding. So as long as you can keep them dry and not moldy, which is the trick, if you can pick them up while they're dry, put them in bags, then, during our deep litter method for the chickens, the chicken coop, every week I'll throw in a bag of leaves and then I'll alternate between leaves and bedding, which is like a pine shavings bedding. I'll go back and forth and back and forth. And the chickens love the leaves. They like to peck at them and dig in them and find bugs and all sorts of things. But the more bags we can get of leaves, the better. I just wanted to pick them up by myself. Anyway, our lawnmower is broken right now. I'm trying to figure out what's going on with it. I've diagnosed lots of things that have been wrong, but I'll figure it out eventually. There's just not being a mechanic myself. I'm kind of kicking myself for not having learned these skills when I was younger. But it's very complicated mechanisms. So just doing one thing at a time, giving it a try. Hopefully I can figure that out so that when the leaves start falling, I can pick them up. So, that's fun. The last thing on that front is fall also means that our goat, our buck named Toulouse, I don't know if I've mentioned his name, he gets in rut is what it's called. It's essentially their hormones just get raging and they want to breed. And so what they do is they just pee everywhere. I don't know if I've talked about this before. They would pee in their mouths, they'll pee on their face, they'll pee on their legs, on the ground, their feet are everywhere. And it stinks. It smells so bad. It's very, very strong. It's like this musty, sweet, nasty scent. And if it gets on you, you will smell I'm not even kidding. I have gloves that still smell like the buck in rut 2 years ago because I had to grab him to trim his hooves. And so I've just set them off to the side. I've saved them for when I need to use them again because the smell, you can wash them, it won't go away. And, it's just the smell's permeating up towards our house. And it's not a huge, I'm used to it now, but he's starting to get pretty stinky. So happy fall. Stinky buck time. All right, let's see. So in terms of author updates, last week I talked a little bit about it. I mentioned this in my email list as well. Um, I did the unthinkable and I actually planned something. It was less painful than I expected it to be, but still also kind of painful. Essentially, I want to publish a book every 6 months. And I believe that's possible. I can write that fast. It's really the editing that stops me up. And so I was realizing part of the problem I have with editing is when I edit full time, I don't get to write. And I just get into this headspace of, I hate this. This is not fun. I'm not enjoying this. I feel stressed. I'm missing my creative time. And so what I'm trying this time, in an effort to keep up with the 6 month schedule for publishing and to keep myself mentally happy and satisfied with writing, is I'm going to write and edit every day. I'm going to do a little bit of both rather than pour everything into just editing or just writing. Um, I shifted my schedule so that I can do some writing. I get up really early in the morning, I'll do some writing, and then later that day in the afternoon, I will do some editing on a different book, not the same book. I will never edit the same book I'm working on. So what that means right now is I'm editing Demon Blooded, which is the second book of the series in the afternoon, and then in the morning I'm writing Dwarf Blooded, which I'm getting pretty close to finishing. Um, I'm at nearly 100,000 words, which is, give or take where I want to be, 10,000 words. I think it may end up more like 110, but it's still very close. So I've shifted my schedule. I now get up at 4:45 in the morning, which I love getting up in the morning. I used to do some stuff at night and then sleep in until 6. But, now that I'm getting back up at 4:45, it feels amazing. I'm really happy with it. I can get, roughly 1,500 to 2,000 words done in the morning before I even get to the chores and the work and everything. So I think that's really going to speed up my writing process if I can get about 2,000 words a day, including on the weekends.
So, yeah, do the math. I mean, that gets a book written in, 2 months or less. And so far for the past week when I've been doing it, it feels really good. But so that's author news is a book every 6 months. That's what you can expect from now on. Additionally, I spent a lot of time this week uploading files and preparing things because by the time you're listening to this podcast, Dragon Blood is actually published on Amazon, Google Plus, or excuse me, Google Play, and all the retailers, Kobo, anywhere you can find books. So here it is right here. If you're watching the video, you can see I got all these books in the mail. I bought a bunch of them from Book Vault. You can see the edge. I think I've showed this before, but I'm really, really happy with that cover. It's beautiful. And I'm actually putting together book boxes as well, which is something I've never done before. So I took this from a buddy of mine, ZS Diamante. He sends out kind of PR boxes to some social media influencers as well as sells them on his site. And so that's what I'm doing now. I got bookmarks and stickers and fancy tissue paper and a seal, a wax seal that I can with some gold wax that I can use with my logo on it. And it's really fun. I assembled the first couple boxes yesterday. I had some people buy some of these book boxes, and it's just exciting. It's so much more fun. I used to have these bubble mailers that I would stuff the books in, and they were safe. I just signed the books with a note, but this just feels more official. It feels nicer. It's fancier. And, there's some extra goodies in there. The bookmark and the sticker and the wax seal and the postcard with a personal message that I write in there. Um, so that's an experiment. And I think I'm going to keep doing it for all my books moving forward. In any case, back to the original. If you want to get Dragon Blooded now, you can either on my website, dankennerbooks.com. I will always prefer if you buy directly from me. However, I do know that some people prefer Amazon as their choice of retailer, and that's fine if that's what you prefer. But it's available today, so go check it out. I love this book. I really love the series. The second book, editing it has been a blast because I love where the story's going. I decided to kind of unexpectedly, but in a good way, treat the series as kind of two halves. So 6 book series, it's an arc across the whole 6 books, but there's the first 3 books, there's almost like a pretty major resolution. It's not a full resolution to the story, but it's a pretty major resolution so that you feel like they're like 2 sets of trilogies. I think it's going to work very well. I'm really happy with that. Um, but I'm just eager to get it done. Now that I missed that publishing feeling, the feeling of celebrating a book coming out. The last book I published was 2 years ago, and it was Ascended, nearly 2 years, maybe not exactly 2 years. I published the Cyber City Kids books last year, but that was through a publisher. It didn't feel the same. This is mine. I've worked hard on it, made the cover myself. It feels really good to publish this book. So I'm taking some time to celebrate this win because it is a good feeling. And hopefully that means that I can feel motivated to get more books out to you, hopefully every 6 months. At least that's the plan. So I believe that's everything in terms of author updates today. So we can shift over to the interview portion with Zachary. Hey Zachary, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Doing very, very well. I'm excited to learn more about your Grim Dark series and learn more about character arcs and what you like about that. Before we get into all that fun stuff, though, how long have you been writing and publishing?
Been writing longer than I've been publishing. My first book I published with my brother last August,
Mhm.
so a little over a year ago. That was our first book. Since then, I published one myself. We published a sequel together, and we've got another one that's done that I'm waiting to release. It's more like a novella, but so we're about 4 books ready. But I've been writing a little longer than that. I've probably been writing for, I might even go as far back as like 3 years.
Mm.
It took a little while to write that first one. And before that, my brother and I were always pitching ideas together. It's been a long journey and a lot of talking, a lot of ideas, but it only really manifested about 2 or 3 years ago. And then we started getting to work on it. Now here we are.
Very cool. So what you brought out the decision to co-author together? Where did that come from? Was that just one of your ideas? You just had to give it a try or?
Well, we worked together kind of on the brainstorming.
Mhm.
When COVID happened and everyone was kind of trapped at home, that's really all we did was have conversations. I was in college in Gainesville, and he was living down in Fort Myers. So we would just get either on a phone call, on Discord, maybe we'd play video games together and put on our headsets and we just talk. I mean, that's really how we spent a lot of the day. And we'd have these ideas that we'd throw back and forth. Sometimes we would like Photoshop pictures and like make little characters and make scenes that we were thinking about. But actually writing the book and being an author just seemed like such a distant like goal that it was a little difficult to take that first step to say, yeah, let's write it. But eventually he did. He wrote the first few chapters actually of Three Rivers Plague without telling me. And then he sent them over. He said, hey, look at these. And I read them. And back then we weren't super trained in writing. So it wasn't the best grammatically, prose-wise, but it was something tangible. And I said, wow, you know what? We could actually do that. And so then we started writing chapters, sending them to each other, slowly formed them into a coherent linear progression. And we turned these fun little ideas we had into an actual story, which we edited and shaved down to something polished. And then after 2 or 3 years, we actually published it. So that's the experience.
Very cool. So it sounds like both of you are kind of, you discovery write as you go, or were these pre-planned aside from your conversations that you just had?
So it's unusual. I mean, I don't know whether to subscribe myself to plotter or pantser, just because, especially with that first book, we talk about it so much that even without writing an outline, we kind of know where we want to be, where we want to end up, and kind of a little about what needs to happen in the middle. But a lot of just random ideas come into writing that middle 90%, where maybe I'll just write a chapter because I had a crazy idea in mind. And then I'll send it to him and say, hey, this is something I was thinking for the middle of the story. What do you think? And if he loves it, if he hates it, either we keep it and play off of it, or we edit it a little to fit more with the other person's thinking. But there is a lot of improv involved in the writing process for us. It's just, we talk about it so much that the outline is kind of in our heads.
Yeah.
Time.
So how do you find the time to just have conversations about it when you know that the writing needs to get done? I'm just curious because, having these conversations is very important from like a creativity standpoint, but how does that translate into writing time? All those conversations.
Yeah, so I think it saves us time in that we don't really plateau as much.
Sure. Okay.
Like I know a lot of writers, they'll try. Right. Some people, it's not a problem. Some people, they can just sit and write, but some people can't even force themselves to do it if they don't have an idea, if they don't have the inspiration. And so someone who's just writing by themselves might sit in front of the computer, try to come up with something, try to figure out how they want to word it and just give up. But if I'm in that position, if my brother's in that position, we'll just sit and talk and something will come from the other person. One of us will probably be in the headspace to be able to write something. And so it kind of keeps us moving a little better. And that saves us time dilly-dallying, not being able to write, I think.
I mean, it sounds logical. It sounds like it would work that way. I'm just curious to know, it feels like those situations where you're in a group meeting and everyone's saying good things. Is there a designated note taker when you're having these conversations, or do you both just kind of remember the things that you talk about?
Usually we remember, but I'm always worried we won't. So I'll tell him, if we're playing a video game or something, I will tell him through voice chat. I'd be like, make sure you put all this in your notes app, like when we're done here, because I don't want to forget it. This, like, if it's a really productive session, like I'll tell him, take all these notes. This is good stuff. So we try to take note of it. We do. It gets a little messy if we're each taking notes on our own ends. Sometimes we'll share a document, just say put it on there, but we try.
Very cool. So creativity is efficient, sounds like. Since you're having these conversations naturally, you're writing these things down. Typically, what is the length of time when you start the first draft to ending the first draft? Is it pretty quick, or does it take some time?
It can. I think the longest one for us was definitely the first one. That's also our longest book, though, so maybe that's offset by that a little bit. But the other side of it is we have kind of our own parts of the book that we choose to write. So if we have an outline of the story, one of us will say, I'm going to write this part, this part, this part, maybe sticking to a particular character arc. And then the other person's going to write this part, this part, and this part. And so if I'm good to go, like chugging through it, getting my part done, and Joshua's not particularly motivated, I'm waiting for him to get something done in order to add on to it. And so that can slow us down a little bit. That happened particularly with the sequel to Three Rivers Plague. We had a little bit of a delay because he was really busy with school stuff and just wasn't really finding the motivation. And I wrote pretty much everything I needed to write for it. So I jumped off and I wrote my own book while I was waiting for him, or at least started writing it, and then eventually finished it. So it can slow us down, it can speed us up. I would say we usually take anywhere from 7-8 months to a year to finish a book.
That's fair.
Yeah,
I
it
think
takes
that's
a little bit.
reasonable. Yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
that's unreasonable at all, particularly if people who have lives, right?
Mhm.
If you were a full-time author, then I'm not that I would judge you, but hopefully it would come a little bit faster. Life is crazy. I get that. Having to write casually because you've got things going on makes total sense.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, right? To hear your process. There's obviously different ways to go about co-authoring. There's no clear or perfect way to do it, but it's interesting to hear the way you've done it. I've co-authored some books myself, but it was not with a family member. It was just a friend. She asked me randomly one day, have you ever considered co-authoring? I was like, no, I've never really thought about it. And then we just did it, and it was fun. But yeah, it's great that you and your brother have this relationship. You probably both have similar interests in some ways. It sounds like you game a little bit together. It sounds like you both might read. So that probably helps in these books because you have these similar interests, I would think.
Yeah, I've always been really intrigued by the idea of a crossover book as well. You mentioned co-authoring with another author. I always wonder how that would work because my brother and I have our own system,
Right.
and even though we write separate chapters and then review each other's chapters and give feedback and stuff, when we do the editing, we kind of iron it all out so it kind of has this combined style. So him and I have a style together. We have a combined voice. It's not switching back and forth between my voice and his. It's one mushed together voice that goes through the course of the book. So then when I wrote my own book by myself, the voice is a little bit different. It has a little bit, different ways of doing certain grammatical things, just ways that I prefer, that I'm more comfortable with.
Yes.
So to do it with another author, say two really popular authors wanted to put their characters together for an adventure, I always wondered what that would look like. How would you do that? And who would write what? It's an interesting idea that I've never really seen anybody do. Not that I can think of off the top of my head.
Well, I'm not a popular author, so I don't fit that bill for you.
Yeah, it's hard.
You
It's hard to
make
get
a
there.
good point, though. I think it's interesting. Honestly, the idea of trying to create a combined voice sounds like an editing nightmare, but I hate editing. So that could just be my own problem. Editing is like the bane of my existence. If you don't mind editing, then maybe that sounds great. For myself and this author, we set very clear character lines, meaning you write these characters, I write these characters, and then that's that. And we don't meddle in each other's work. Other than, like, when it came down to editing, we would look through each other's stuff and we would make word suggestions, possibly slight phrasing discussion or phrasing changes. But for the most part, we meant to preserve that person's voice in those chapters, knowing that they were clearly distinct because of that character, right? Her character's thought spoke very differently from mine. And so it worked for us, right? We stayed within the confines of each of those chapters. And so, yeah, there was a voice change, but it was a purposeful one, right? It was meant to be different because we were looking at very different people from a first person perspective. So I think it worked out well. People seem to think it worked out well. I cannot imagine trying to create a combined voice, though, with another author who I was not related to. That sounds crazy.
Yeah.
But maybe.
It sounds tough. I feel like you would have to do it where you just, if it's a crossover book, right? I write my character, you write yours, and you just tell the perspective that way. I feel like that's probably the only way to do it.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, in our case, we're both pantsers, both discovery writers. So we didn't pre-plan. We didn't do lots of discussion. Like, we had some minor discussions, particularly if one of us felt a little bit stuck. But for the most part, it was I write a chapter, send it to her. She'd write a chapter, send it to me. And we just built the story as we went. We didn't really know where it was going. But we figured it out as we went, and it was fun for us, and that worked for us because we're both discovery writers. If one of us a little bit more plotty than the others, that might be a little more tricky because I don't plot. I can't really plot. Just doesn't work for me. But it doesn't mean it couldn't work somehow. You just have to figure out how it works with each author. That's what's most important.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
I actually did something this week. I signed up for it a couple months ago, but there's this anthology thing called RinthCon.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of like a sci-fi convention.
Cool.
And so this group of people gets together and we all write like a little scene of our characters attending this convention, almost like a Comic-Con or something, but it's in space. It's in like this moon hotel, and it's called RinthCon, based on the head guy's books that they're called Explorers of Rinth, something along those lines. And so he puts it together and he invites people to write little submissions. So my brother and I actually wrote a couple of submissions to that where we just threw our characters in and have a couple of short stories in there.
That's cool.
Yeah, so that was fun. That was almost a crossover, but it's still our own individual stories just in this same place. But that's as close as I got. And it kind of got me thinking along those lines of, well, what would it look like if it was characters meeting each other, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's very cool. I never thought about doing something like that, but I think it would shine an interesting light on your voice when you see it come next to other people in a similar universe or a similar story, but it's not quite the same. I think that could be a very interesting exercise. I
Yeah.
don't know that I'd feel confident doing that, though. That's my own problem, though. It's, putting it out there next to other people that I don't know still. So for your books, you primarily write pretty dark. The content is relatively dark, right? It sounds like a post-apocalyptic, undead, zombie type stuff, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah,
relatively.
yeah, oh, yeah. Okay, very good.
It's pretty dark sounding when you put it that way. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure there's more elements to it, right? It's not just gore and whatever. But you mentioned wanting to write grimdark stories with glimmers of hope. So let's talk a little bit about that, why that's important to you, and what does that even mean, first of all?
Sure. So I think a lot of people associate grimdark with like nihilism. Like,
Sure.
yeah, things just suck. They're always going to suck. Some people talk about like Game of Thrones that way. They're like, yeah, everybody's just terrible and like the world is evil. There's no hope. But I don't think that's what grimdark is. I don't think that's what it's meant to be. And so I actually talked to some other authors about this very recently. Grimdark, most people also associate it with fantasy. I think grimdark can be sci-fi. It can be whatever. It just means that the world around your characters is very, very dark. Bad things happen. It's not as fantastical as like almost like a children's story where things tend to go very smoothly, everyone's friendly. It's more realistic, right? The realities of our world is that there's a lot of politics, there's a lot of cruel people. Terrible things do happen to good people, bad people. But the grimdark stories that we write are about approaching those sorts of worlds with a glimmer of hope. And usually that manifests in your protagonist or a character, or one of your lead characters, where they're genuinely trying to do some good, or there is a sign that something good may come out of it, even if all you can do is your best just to try to make a name for yourself or to help one person, right? That kind of thing. I think of it like almost like The Boys, right? The show The Boys, the superhero show. That first season of that show, it's very clear that this world is screwed up. The people that everyone thinks are superheroes are all horrible, really, and they do terrible things. And they shouldn't be celebrities, they shouldn't be famous, but they are. And then you have that one character, Starlight, who is genuinely good. Right? She wants to be a hero. She doesn't know how messed up the world is because she grew up on this rural farm training to be a hero. And so when she's exposed to the realities of this world, how cruel the other heroes are around her, she tries to combat it. And the story is kind of her learning about how cruel these things are and still trying to maintain who she is. And then she meets Huey, who is from the other outside of it, where he's not a hero, but he's starting to see how terrible all the heroes are because one of them killed his girlfriend. And so that kind of thing is what I'm talking about, where there is some good in the story. Your character can be good, can do good things. And that's something that we try to do with our zombie apocalypse story with Three Rivers Plague, is that our characters aren't just all evil scumbag. There's layers to them. They're complicated. They're conflicted with themselves often. Thomas, our protagonist in Three Rivers Plague, he's a drug addict. He's addicted to drugs because he's a famous musician, plays rock music. I mean, that's just kind of how it is when you live that kind of life. So then when the apocalypse happens and all those superficial things like wealth and fame and all that kind of gets stripped away, you start to see the person underneath and who they really are as an individual without all those things. And that real Thomas starts to come out, and he has to grapple with his addictions, with the dark sides of life. And I don't enjoy the thought that all these characters would just be horrible people. I feel like these characters have layers and they can do bad things and they can make mistakes, but ultimately at least one person, or in our case, a handful of characters, do want to do some good, and they want to do the best they can with this really dark, twisted world that they've been thrown into.
Fascinating. I am honestly, that's the type of book that I enjoy most. I think there's a lot of people that look, if you're looking for a book that's all, rainbows and unicorns and skipping through the field, there's nothing wrong with that. It's totally fine. But the one thing that frustrates me the most about is reading a book that just everything seems so unrealistic. Just like, that's it just gets to a point where I, I get annoyed with all the unrealistic. A book like that sounds, while hard to read, sounds almost enlightening and very grounding in a way, in a very odd way, because you're taking a look at the realities of life should situations like that happen. You're looking at real people. How do you capture real people like that in your characters? Do you plan out their arcs so that they have the development you're looking for? Do they develop during your writing? It's like, how do you make sure to capture that reality in your characters?
Yeah, so that's part of our improvisation
Mhm.
that we do. It's very hard to plan out a realistic character.
Sure.
You kind of have to, I mean, you can have a start point and an end point, but all the scenes that they live through, it's almost better, in my experience, to just start writing the scene
Mhm.
and see what your character does. Know who your character is, maybe take them for a walk, quote unquote, as in writing like a couple chapters with them
Yeah.
to get to know them. And then when you write this main story, put them in the situation that you're creating. But rather than saying it absolutely has to go this way, no other way, maybe just see what they do.
Mhm.
See, well, if this is happening, what would this character do? How would they react? And kind of let them walk themselves a little. And when you do that, a lot of times you'll come out with a more realistic scenario, a more realistic scene, because that character is through you
Mhm.
almost a real person, right? Reacting in real time, making real choices. And maybe that'll affect where the story ends up. Maybe that'll affect how some things resolve themselves. But ultimately, I think you end up with a more real, nuanced story because of that.
I'm inclined to agree. Look, I'm not pro plotter, pro pantsing, do whatever works for you. I think that's the most important, is do what works for you. But there is something to be said about during the creative process, like you said, um, discovering the person as you are, like you said, taking them for a walk. I like that. I've never heard of that before, but it makes absolute sense to me. Oftentimes when I'm writing characters, I don't know how they'll react until they get to a certain situation. But then when they react in the story, it's like, oh, that makes total sense. But oftentimes what I'm having to do is explain it either in writing or in side stories or whatever, or just like in notes on the side. Why did she or he react that way? Because it's obvious what they did. That is just what they would react. But then it's like, what happened in their past that would make them react that way? And that provides a really fun opportunity to bring some backstory in, or flashbacks, or slight explanations for why they're sensitive to someone commenting a specific thing, right? And
Yeah.
that doesn't come for me until I'm writing, like you said, taking them for a walk. I know there's a lot of people that don't feel comfortable with that. They prefer to know a person's backstories, have character sheets. I think that's awesome. I can't operate that way. So
Mhm.
it sounds like you're kind of in the middle-ish, right? Which is excellent.
Yeah.
But you take them
No.
for a walk and then see how they react. Have you ever run into any issues with characters being a little too real with the story?
Too real? I don't think
No.
so. I mean, sometimes it'll take us in a different direction or change
Or
a scene a little bit. And that kind of just adds to it, in my opinion. I know we have one character in particular named Kennedy. His name is Dick Kennedy. And he's kind of this post-apocalyptic, almost a detective character.
oh,
He
sure.
used to work for the CIA. We're writing prequel novellas about him because we love him so much.
Nice.
But he's a side character in our apocalypse stories, and he's got some real sass to him. Like he
Mm-hmm.
makes very witty comments about things, not intentionally trying to be funny, just because he has that kind of personality where he'll say really absurd things, almost like Rod, or is it Rust from True Detective season one?
Probably. I don't know. It doesn't sound. Haven't
Yeah,
seen
that's
that.
fine if you haven't seen it. But in that show, there's a detective character named Rust, and he just says really odd things
Huh.
randomly, but with a straight face, and we do that a little bit with Kennedy. But I remember in book two, there was one particular scene where this character, Lorena, gets in a car with them, and they're driving down the street, going to Lorena's settlement where her people are, and they're having a conversation with her. And we planned out this scene as being like, okay, they're going to talk to her. She's going to tell them what's up. She's going to be like, how do I know I can trust you? And they're going to tell her this to make her trust them. But as we were writing it, we get to that part where she's like, why should I trust you guys? And we're just thinking, well, she got in a car with them. Like Kennedy's going to point that out because that's who Kennedy is. So then we wrote the line and we said, Kennedy's going to be like, you got in a car with her. And stuff like that happens. We're like, okay, this character has to say something here because that's their personality. That's who they are. And that's happened quite a few times with Kennedy. Is he'll say something funny or witty, just because that's what he would do.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
yeah.
it almost brings a smile to your face, either as a reader or even as a writer, when people are true to their nature, because it's just like, oh, that's so, in this place, in this case, Kennedy, or that's so and so. That's how they would react. And both negative and positive, right? I think, you're talking about your main character and his addiction to drugs and what that could mean for the decisions he makes. And sometimes it's hard to watch, knowing your characters are going to do something dumb or they're going to make decisions like, but that's just how they would react, right? And I think there's something in readers that they can detect that when the author didn't allow the character to be themselves, if that makes sense. There's a difference with developing and growing and learning as a character, and character progression is important. And snap changing something because you don't like it. You don't like maybe it was too negative, or maybe you didn't like the way that character reacts. Like, but that's how they would react. So you kind of just have to let it happen, and that's hard sometimes. Did you ever run into instances like that, or were you pretty happy with how they reacted throughout these books? I think you've published what, 4 now? 3 or 4?
We've published 3.
3.
We had a Kindle Vella story
Oh, nice.
as well.
Very cool.
That went for 10 episodes. We wrote that for the Vellies competition.
Okay.
Maybe we'll turn it into a novella at some point. But really, we've only got 3 books published. One of them's just me, and then 2 of them are our Apocalypse series.
Nice.
But I can't really say there's been an instance where the character being themselves was a problem. There's been instances where we didn't plan it that way.
Right.
And then it changed because of it, obviously. But I feel like we're usually pretty good. We'd rather stick with what the character would do. I think it's because characters are more important to us than plot.
Yeah.
We're very character-centric writers. I get that from all the literary fiction classes I did. I took literary fiction courses in college.
Oh, nice.
And it was explained to me that literary fiction is a snapshot of a character in whatever world, but it's important to get to know the character more than anything. And then genre fiction is about tropes, world building, that sort of thing. And so we write genre fiction, but I really like to hone in on the characters. I feel like if you get a reader to fall in love with a character, everything else is secondary to that. They're going to be invested in what happens to that character because you made them fall in love with the character. And so if I'm making sure that that character stays true to themselves, if I'm writing them as I should be, as they would behave, that's what matters. I'm writing the story because of that. So if the plot has to change to suit that, well, good. I want it to suit that. That's the most important thing, is that these characters are themselves.
The one thing I want to point out as well there is there's a, how do I say this, a negative positive approach to that as well. Sometimes a character is so hateable that you also draw the person in because they're intentionally hateable, but not like in a push away manner. It's just like, oh, I dislike this person so much, but it's working for the reader. Because, not every character can be likable. Sometimes they're just jerks or egotistic or, sadistic or whatever. And that's just who they are. But, I think sometimes people make characters a little bit too likable, if that makes sense. They need to be likable when they need to be likable. But then there's some that have their value in being not likable, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So not everything is perfect and happy.
And I don't think every character should be. I think a lot of times that happens specifically because people make their characters really intense reflections of themselves.
Yeah,
and that's okay. You can put yourself into a character. Like, I have no issue with that, but everybody thinks differently. Every character should think differently. So if you're writing every character in your story to agree on something, whatever the issue is, I feel like that's a little unrealistic. That one character is going to feel differently about something than another. And however you feel about that particular issue or that problem, that conflict, there's nothing wrong with writing a character that feels differently from you. You shouldn't feel offended or anything because you have to write a character differently. Thomas is very different from me in a lot of ways, not just because of drug use. Thomas, he thinks differently than me. He comes from a different life experience where he was a musician and everybody knew his name and the fame kind of went to his head. And he was just kind of struggling to get through life every day because he was always taking drugs. He's not going to react to a problem the same way that I would. And likewise, Kennedy is not going to react to a problem the same way that I would, because he was a government agent and he was in the military and now he's got this kind of detective job. These characters are not me. So I can make a character a little less likable. I can make a character have an opinion that I would think is wrong and not worry about it. That's just the art of writing characters.
Right. So next question is a little tricky, right? How does one feel confident doing that in this world of unrest, differing opinions aren't always welcome on
Mhm.
a lot of in social settings, regardless of what you're looking at, what you believe, what you don't believe. A lot of people react very negatively. In fact, I was watching a video on social media. This was years ago. This was back when I was first on social media, and someone was deeply offended, and they spoke out about it on social media that someone had a racist character in their books. But the book was about a terrorist, a literal terrorist hijacking an airplane, and they were a racist. And the person was like, I mean, I'm not racist. The author was like, I'm not racist. But this story it's fantasy. It's fiction. It's not real. There needs to be a
Yeah.
reflection of evil in some way. So the question for you is, how do you feel confident doing that, knowing that those differing pieces of opinion in your book aren't going to blow back on you? Or how do you deflect that if it does, if people try to blow that back on you?
Right. And I get the fear of that. I mean, there are readers that will come out and say that, and those people are more vocal than the ones that don't
Yeah,
care.
that's fair.
Because the ones that don't care aren't going to say anything about it, but the one in a million that do might speak up about it, and your defense is just it's going to have to be, whether they
Not
accept it
you.
or not, this is a character.
Yeah.
This is a bad guy. If he's willing to hijack a plane,
Right.
is it a surprise that he's also racist? Like,
Hmm.
this is a bad person. And that's an odd dynamic too. Imagine,
It's weird.
out of those two things, you're like, oh, he's hijacking a plane, he's gonna kill 100 people. But he has, racist opinions. It's like both of those things are really, really bad. Why would you only be offended by one of them?
That is an interesting point. Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's unusual to me, but I get it. People sometimes they hit a hot spot. Maybe they hit a vulnerable position where they really really care about one particular issue, and so to see it expressed in a story, maybe that triggers them. And my sympathies for that. But these are characters. They aren't the author themselves. They're written to tell a particular story, and maybe there's a message buried underneath that story trying to convey something to you, and it's just not as on the nose as this character outright telling you how you should feel.
Or it's possible there may not be a message. It's
Or
possible it's
maybe
just for
maybe it's
pure
just a story.
entertainment. Yeah, I
Maybe it's
think you
just
really.
theoretical.
Uh,
Maybe.
well, I don't dislike discussions around hard things like this. I think the important matter is that, stories are stories and they're there for a reason, whether for entertainment value or to deliver a message, and understanding the author, and recognizing that stories are stories is an important piece of it. Well, people can read how they want to read, but I do appreciate characters that can be themselves, and, watching them learn and develop. And I, as the reader, could make that decision if I want to keep going or not. So hopefully that gives authors confidence as they're writing these real characters.
Yeah, hopefully.
But no, this has been an amazing conversation. There's probably so much more we could discuss. We could go so deep in all these things. I love character development. My stories are character led as well, just because I like to read and write stories that way. But before we end here, where can people find more information about you and your books if they want to check them out?
The best place to go is probably my Twitter/X. It's at Zach Forbes Bro. Just because I'm a Forbes brother, we call ourselves the Forbes brother, me and Joshua. And so I'm Zach Forbes Bro, as in that's the Forbes brother that I am. But that's my Twitter handle. You go there, you should find a link to my website in my bio. And then I also have an Instagram. It's at Prozac Daily, spelled Pro ZACH. And we have our website. It's on Wix. So we haven't yet set up a unique domain name for it. It's just ZacharyForbes1.wixsite. But like I said, the link to that is in my bio, and you can go there to find all of our books. They'll link you to Amazon. We currently have 3 out. We have a novella on the way. So if anybody ever wants to DM me or have another discussion with me somewhere else, I'm always open to talking to other people. I'm judging the novella competition that's going on now.
Oh, cool.
The self-published novella competition. My brother and I were both judges. So we're in the Discords for that. Always open to talking to other authors. We love being involved in the community.
Very cool. I think that's awesome. Well, I'll make sure all those links are in the show notes so people can click on them and find them pretty easily. And yeah, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Zachary. It was very enlightening and just real, no pun intended, but just real characters. It's an important piece of writing. I get distracted pretty easily when characters stray outside of their norm, and I don't like that. So if you're listening today and you really enjoy it, I didn't mention this at the beginning of the podcast, but please let me know where you're listening. Let me know what you like about the podcast. Comment wherever you're listening to it. It's everywhere: YouTube, or, Spotify, wherever you're listening to it. Would love to hear your thoughts. Also, if you'd like to join me, just head to thecasualauthor.com and fill out the pitch form. I'd love to hear what you're about, what you're passionate about, and I'd love to have you on the podcast to have a conversation. Additionally, if you want to support the show for whatever reason, if you like the content, you want to hear more of me, I'd love to spend more time making bonus content for my Patreon, but I need to, lay off a job first before I can get to that. But still, if you'd like to support the show for a couple dollars a month, $3 or $6 are the two options. I would love your support. I'd really appreciate that. But still, you can always listen to it. I will continue to make this podcast. It's for you. So hopefully you find value in it. Next week, we'll be talking to Katie Cooper about how to overcome author burnout. So we go into details about how she has experienced burnout, what she did about it, what strategic measures she employs to not get to that point again. And she offers some advice to new and long-term authors on how to prevent yourself from reaching that burnout point again. So I think you're going to enjoy that conversation. I hope you join us for that next week. Anyway, thanks for listening. I hope you have a wonderful week. Bye.